Great, great, great. Good morning. Yes. Hello. Welcome. Welcome to the webinar. This is going to be all about %B buckets. And I said in the email that in particular, we're going to look at the buckets per symbol template, and we'll get to that. But before we get to that, I will also want to take a look at the %B migration template. And before we get to that, I just want to do a quick review of last week. Let's say I should just get these slides going. Okay, standard disclaimer. So we're going to cover last week's good, bad, and ugly stocks. We're going to look at the %B bucket migration template, and then we'll look at the %B buckets per symbol. So bucket migration is kind of an overview of all of the stocks in one view, and then the buckets per symbol lets you drill down into the individual stocks. So we'll go ahead and get started. If you saw my email yesterday, this is I advertised this as being the second most exciting thing that's happening today. You know, that's your mileage may vary on that one, but the most exciting, if you read down to the very bottom of that email, the most exciting thing happening today, and it's just started, is the FA Cup final between Manchester City and my hometown where I was born, Watford. So that actually started at 9 a.m. So we'll have to monitor that as we go forward. If Watford win, it will be a huge upset to the expected outcome, and the first time that Watford's ever won the FA Cup final. So it'll be very exciting to pay attention to. So last week we did a basics Educator Getting Started webinar where I talked about all of the things that you can do in the program with templates, what templates are, how to get data, and all that kind of thing. So if you missed that webinar, there will be a link sent out after this one to give you access to that one as well. And then also there will be a link to, if you've registered, obviously you registered for this one because you're here, there will be a link sent out to this recording as well. And that normally comes out due to the way that Zoom software works and the Zoom webinar works. That email normally comes out one day later from the start of the webinar. So look out for that recording tomorrow at 9 a.m. So one thing that is always good to do when you first run the program and you're interested in kind of getting a orientation of what's happening in the markets or what has happened in the markets is to look at the good, bad, and ugly report. And you'll find this in your hot topics category. It's currently one of my favorites, and these are the three templates we're going to look at today. I've put a little star by them so they appear in my favorites category. And today I'm just going to be looking at the CBOE weeklies list, and you can run any of these templates on any list, but I'm going to focus on this list because it is a up-to-date list. Everybody has this. It's exactly the same on everybody's system, whereas other lists that I use, for instance, the S&P 1500 list, is something that is not kept up to date in the program. You can download it from the shared folder, but it's not as up to date as the CBOE weeklies. And actually, you get the same kinds of information from both. It's just that the S&P 1500 obviously has 1,500 stocks, and the CBOE weeklies only has 500. But these are the most actively, you could say, the most actively traded stocks because these are all the stocks that have weekly options associated with them. So I find this to be a very good list to highlight potential candidates that have good liquidity for trading. So let's quickly run this. Okay, so I'm just going to hit the run button. And the report that comes up is this. Because we're running this on a weekend, then we can look at, I like to sort by the week to date column. And this is just showing now in the top of the list. Excuse the noise. There's a plane just taking off, heading to Vancouver Island from Lake Union. Okay, so sort this by week to date. You can sort it by day. That will just give you the stock in order that were the best performers on the day. So that would be Friday. But if you're looking for what's happened during the week, then sort by week to date. Obviously, there's a month to date here too, and a year to date. So best performing stocks this week in my list are right here. Let's bring up a chart so we can just kind of see the action here. You'll note that the charts, and if I put this side by side over here, you'll notice that I've already put a layout on this chart, and you'll get this layout when we run the buckets per symbol template. But it's basically just showing Bollinger Bands. There's a 50-period moving average on here, and then there's a Bollinger Band %B indicator at the bottom here. So these are the best performing stocks for the week. We'll go down quickly through the list just to see what's going on. If you ever end up in a situation like this where your chart shows blank, click on the little minus sign. What it means is you manually scale the chart, and when you move to a new stock, that scaling doesn't really apply. Okay, so we're going to go down through the list. We've got COTY here. So we're just trying to orient ourselves to what happened during the week. Rite Aid had a little bit of a rally off of a low down here. Zillow had a pretty good week, 12% week. GoPro had a 10% week. Snapchat, that was an IPO last year, I believe. Plug Power, Under Armour, all very familiar names, I'm sure. I find this template a good way to, first of all, just get a view of what has been happening. What I like to do is do the weekly view here and just scroll down and see what's been going on in the week. But what I also find interesting in here is, if you open this up a little bit, you can say, what was the best performing stock, let's say 3 months ago. Why would you want to see 3 months ago? Well, it's interesting because what you can immediately see from here by sorting it on the stocks that had the best performance 3 months ago, that would have been so we're in May, so it would have been April, March, February, May. Yeah, so February period. So what you can see is you can look at the stocks that had great performance there, and then just scan over to the left a little bit. Okay, so you go to the -2 column. So this is March, and then April. So, interesting to note that the stocks that have performed very well in a particular month, the subsequent month, they don't necessarily perform as well. Some of them obviously still continue to do well, but often you'll get a negative, like in here. You've got this Wayfair stock, which had a great performance 3 months ago, but then 2 months ago it was negative. So if you're just, it's kind of a little bit of a warning that you cannot expect, obviously everybody knows that, but you cannot expect the great performances to continue. But also very interesting to get an overall sense what you could do in here, because these reports are all Excel files that are saved in the reports folder, is you can open this up in Excel and then run yourself a little calculation in Excel and find out what the average gain is for the subsequent week after having such a huge run up on, or the subsequent month after having such a huge run up on the on 1 month. So it's a quick way of doing a very sort of rough accounting for back testing. Not exact. It's not running over all time frames and all time frames. It's just using particular months that you're choosing over here. So anyway, that's a very interesting thing to do. I thought I would just show that. Also good to look at. Let's take the week to date and let's see what stocks didn't perform so well last week. And you'll note that in the best performers, the highest performing stock was VNet with 16% gain. But the worst performing stocks, and there's quite a few of them, that are more than 16% loss. So you've got EMES, you've got the ETF, which is the 3X bull on Brazil. Overstock is hitting new lows. Endpoint, Teva Pharmaceuticals, and so on. But interesting to take a look at that. Anyway, let's move on to the percent B bucket migration. What is this all about? Let me bring back Edgerator. And we'll go to bucket migration. Now, normally, as I said before, folks are used to running this template on the S&P 1500 stocks. That is something that Ian Woodward always did. And I do that too. But for this webinar, I'm just going to run it on the CBOE weeklies. If you compare the two reports from both lists, they're very similar. You get very similar information. So I think it's quite a good proxy to run it on the CBOE weeklies list. So all you do is you just select your list, hit the run. And what it's going to do, as you see in the bottom left here, is it's just going through and calculating, coming up with this report, which is showing where percent B. Now, I didn't talk about what percent B is, and I'm assumed that everybody knows what percent B is, but I will just in case, I will just talk about that in the context of this chart. Bollinger Bands on this chart are highlighted with the shaded area here, and Bollinger Bands are calculated based on a look-back period of 20 periods, and it's basically figuring out the volatility in the stock over those 20 periods. There is a 20-period moving average, and then the volatility, the two standard deviations are plotted around that 20-period moving average. So you can see when the bands get wider, the volatility over that period over those last 20 days has increased. And so that's what that's showing you. So you'll find that when a stock hits the lower part of the Bollinger Band and continues lower, the bands will widen. And in periods when there's a what's called a squeeze, the bands narrow, meaning that volatility is drying up. Stock is not moving quite as much, not having as big daily moves, and so the bands narrow. So one thing that is used a lot is band width. That's an indication of the percentage width of these bands, how wide the band is compared to the price of the stock. And then another thing that's useful is to know where stocks are trading within the Bollinger Bands. It is often looked at when stocks are trading at the lower end of the band as that there might be a change coming in terms of a move could come in and the stock could come back up across the Bollinger Bands to get to the upper bands. But the idea being that the Bollinger Bands will contain the price movement. And so it gives you some target. If you're trading stocks short or long, if you're trading options, it gives you a target of what to expect. Now, of course, in this case, and this is something that frequently happens, is if stock hits the lower Bollinger Band, where my cursor is pointing right now, that is an action point, and you might there be looking at price recovering and coming back across the band, or what can often happen is a price just continues to fall. The Bollinger Bands widen, price is still somewhat contained within the band, but you'll find that the close price here is kind of below the lower Bollinger Band as the price falls. Close price is always below the lower Bollinger Band down here. So just because stock reaches the upper or lower band doesn't mean that it's going to bounce and be contained. It could completely fall. In cases like that, Bollinger Bands will widen. Now, percent B is, and that's the indicator on the lower area down here. So if we look at where my cursor was, where the stock is touching the lower band, percent B, when it touches the lower band, will be 0. And that's exactly what it means. It means that the stock is actually at the lower band. If percent B was 1, as in the case over here, then price is at the upper band. If percent B is greater than 1, it's above the upper band. If percent B is less than 1, shaded area down here, then it's below the lower band. Now, percent B buckets really divide that bandwidth into 10 deciles. And so with an extra one added for below the lower band, that is your bucket 0. And above the upper band, that's your bucket 11. If stock is above the upper band, as in this case over here, we would call that being in bucket 11. If it's below the lower band, it's in bucket 0. If it's in bucket 5, then the stock is in the middle of the bands, as in down here. And that would indicate a percent B of 0.5. But we just split it into deciles to make it easy to see. You don't really get any extra advantage by going into all these percentages and putting it into hundredths. Deciles is very useful. And then when you put it into deciles, like tenths of the width, then when you get moves of certain amounts on a daily basis, you might get we could call that a 1 bucket move if it moved from, say, the lower band down here, 0, to maybe this is, well, let's take a look. This is bucket number 2 right here. We would call that a 2 bucket move. And so you can tell where impulses happen when there are huge bucket moves. And Ian always said that, well, the kahuna indicator from Ian and Ron of HDSI is to do with your percent change on a daily basis, and the bucket moves also give you that indication too. Anyway, so that's a quick overview on what a recap on what percent B is and buckets. Okay, this report. Let's go back to this report. This report is talking about all of the stocks that were in the list, and it's categorizing all of them into where they will sit within their Bollinger Bands, and categorized by the percent B bucket. So this is another useful reason that we split it into the 10 deciles, is that we can now put them into these buckets and show how many stocks are in each bucket. And this is very interesting to see historically. You can see at market extremes when all the stocks are in their lower, below the lower band. The chart on the right, the pie chart, is just an indication of the mid band and where stocks sit in relation to the mid band. So as of Friday, 72% of the stocks in the CBOE weeklies list are below their middle Bollinger Band, and only 28% of stocks are above the middle Bollinger Band. The chart here, where it says percent B buckets, just breaks out each individual bucket. The green ones are above the middle band. And you can see a profile appearing. So as days go on, and we can scroll back through prior days with this report, we can see how the bucket profile has changed. So it's a useful way of seeing, which stocks, not which stocks, this is giving you an overall picture of where stocks fit in their Bollinger Band. It's kind of a market profile, essentially. A useful thing with this report too, before I get into the inflows and outflows, is if you bring up a chart, which I'll do by clicking on View Chart, and that chart is actually over here. I'm going to put these two things side by side. I just will click on. If you want to know the the secret Windows keys for putting two windows side by side, it's press your Windows key and press your right or your left arrow, and it gives you then the option of just picking two windows to put side by side. That's a Windows, I believe, 8 and 10 functionality. I'm not sure that's available in Windows 7, but definitely Windows 8 and 10. Okay, 1 second. Okay. In the chart, what I would like to do is, if I press my spacebar on the chart, it brings up a symbol choosing dialog, and I'll use SPY, just because this is kind of gives you a good idea of the overall market. It's a proxy for the S&P 500. And if I turn on annotations, this little I'd call it a speech bubble up here. Turn on annotations. Right, now, as I scroll through the times on the chart over here, you can see that the little viewing arrow points to the bar for the day that is being viewed over here. And in reverse, you can do the opposite. You can click on a bar, and the migration report will update to highlight how the market profile was on that particular day. And I may be using market profile. That may be a term that's used for another complete other thing. I'm just talking about general kind of breadth of the market here. Okay, so how did stocks look? How did the buckets look Christmas Eve? All right, this is extreme. We had so in this particular list, 94% of stocks were below the middle band. Only 6% were above the middle band. If you run this on the S&P 1500, actually the number is even higher, something like 98 and 99% below the middle band. But you can see that most of the stocks are now were grouped into bucket 0, meaning they were below the lower Bollinger Band. Extreme conditions down here. Also, as you go up through the Bollinger Bands, you're finding fewer and fewer stocks. So it's an interesting, you don't find this kind of condition very frequently. What did it look like the day before that? Well, it was still pretty bad, but not as bad. So, but then the day after, or actually that would have been the 26th, that is Boxing Day, then things started to get a little bit better. And you can see now we're moving away from the extreme, we're still in extreme territory, but it's the bucket situation is improving here. What you can do, what I find it interesting to do, is to actually select a date, say the 24th, the extreme day when the low was put in, and walk forward just by pressing the next button. And I just look at the profile and see how stocks are changing within their Bollinger Bands. Okay, now let's talk about the area below. This is so the original report for percent B buckets was really just this top area. So where the stocks are within their Bollinger Bands all grouped together and calculated in the number of stocks that are in certain buckets, and then this pie chart, which is interesting to look at, but it also left you wondering if you're moving from one day to the next, say the 24th to the 26th, you can see that the buckets have changed. So you used to have on the 24th about 250 stocks in below the lower Bollinger Band. If I go to the 26th, well, now there's almost 0 stocks below the lower Bollinger Band, but you have 150 stocks in, say, bucket number 2. But where did they come from is the question that was always it left you asking that question. Where did they come from? Are the stocks coming into bucket number 2 from lower buckets, which in the case, you can imagine they are here because we had most of the stocks were in the lower buckets, or are they coming in from higher buckets? So obviously there's a migration of stocks. Some are coming from lower buckets, some are coming from upper buckets. So this migration report will show where stocks are moving from. And what is fascinating, I find, is to just go through the days, day by day. So we'll take a look at, go back to the 24th again, this was an extreme, and just see how the migration occurred as we move up through climbing this wall of worry over here. And just let's take a look at the migration. So you can see the day after on the 26th, because you have green areas here, they're shaded green, and the darker green just means more stocks are in that area. So these are green is an indication of good up moves. Red is an indication of that would be bad down moves. So it could be good if you're short stocks, but in general, that's what this report indicates: green being up and red being down. I won't use the term good and bad. Up and down. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of green here. Now, as we go through, we're seeing where these stocks are coming from. Just look at the shaded areas here. We're getting movement from the lower buckets to the upper buckets. Now we're having like a little bit of a retrace here. You can see this is the bar we're looking at over here. A little bit of a retrace. Okay, but now we get a shift in the migration. So migration is now continuing higher. All right, now we've got an interesting situation up here. We have 81% of stocks above the upper Bollinger Band, a pretty flat profile in the above 50%. So how do things progress from a situation like that? Well, now things just start pushing into the upper areas of the Bollinger Bands and the upper buckets. And you can just go through day by day and see how that all played out. And then you'll get to a situation like this day, where probably a lot of people, because you had reached back to these highs over here, a lot of people were perhaps expecting that the downtrend. I mean, I think a lot of people in this, when the market was coming up in January and February, a lot of people were looking for a continuation of this down move. I don't know if you were in that camp, but I know a lot of people were thinking that they were looking for that. And these 4 days here were a period where perhaps people were now thinking that was going to continue. And so you can see that the buckets start to get bad again. A lot of stocks are moving down into the lower parts of the Bollinger Bands. And then it just happened to be a buy the dip situation. Seems to be the story of the market, buy the dip. At some point that's not going to work, but it's been good up till now. And then we come into recent times. Everything's looking rosy up here. We're at the top of the Bollinger Bands again. We're breaking into new highs in the SPY. And now we've entered into this retrace over here. Stocks are moving back into the lower parts of the Bollinger Bands. We had an extreme day on Monday, the 13th. That was Monday, right? That was this past Monday, Monday the 13th. And in theory, that was all China trade news that came out on Sunday night. Market gapped lower, and then we've had this week of just recovering somewhat from that extreme. Again, it was an extreme because we had 225 stocks below the lower Bollinger Band, so it was an extreme. But you've seen what real extremes can look like. When we went back to December 24th, they can look a lot worse than that. And now we're in this tentative recovery phase, and it's obviously an interesting point. Now this is Friday. This is where we stand with, as I said before, 28% of stocks above mid-band. A lot of stocks are in the lower areas. There has been a recovery this week since Monday, let's say, and all eyes are now on the market to see if we go to new highs or if we're going to break down again. So interesting to watch this going forward. So I'm just going to answer a few questions on this one just before we move on. Okay, Windows 7. Apparently the keys to put Windows side by side does work on Windows 7. Thank you. How do I get the outflow showing and the chart of SPY? Okay, so this report is, you can see that the scroll bar will only scroll, it won't scroll the whole screen. So you'll always have in view this top area showing the percent B buckets and the pie chart. As you scroll down, it's only going to go from row 34 and start scrolling from row 34. So if you have a screen which you don't have a lot of real estate on the screen, you may be looking at a view which is somewhat like this, in which case you'll be scrolling and you won't see the lower part. And there's really, the solution to that is to zoom out, and the way that you would zoom out in these reports is I always just select a cell, a blank cell, normally with the mouse, and then use your zoom function, which I'm using a mouse, and I have a wheel on my mouse, and that's the way that, that my system will work. So I press the control key on the keyboard, and then I use the wheel mouse, and it will zoom out. That's a very simple way to zoom out. Depending on your system, you'll have other ways of doing that same functionality, and everyone's will be slightly different, but that's a good way to do it. And then you can scroll down. And then below this is a summary of the inflows and outflows. If you wanted to go into all of the details, you can go down even further. That's up to you. I never normally look down that far, but it can be interesting to look at. Okay. And that probably is the, let's see, Paul, how did you show more of the lower window? Oh, that's exactly the same question. Jana, does this require HDSI data to work? No, it does not. As I said, you missed this part, but I did say I'm running this on the CBOE weeklies list, which is available and updated in the program whenever there's a new update. So if you're using edge rated data, this will all work fine. I don't see any prior and current buttons on my %B report. I didn't say where to get, and I should have mentioned this, where do you find these templates? Because the original template, which was the %B buckets report, is actually still available, and it's not this report. It's not the bucket migration report. If you're still using %B buckets report, I would encourage you to migrate to the %B migration report, which you will find in hot topics. Come into your hot topics category and then find your %B buckets. That is not correct. Come into your Pro Tools category and find the %B migration report in there. Pro Tools category is the general category for all of the templates that have special coding behind them. So they're not just doing scans using some of the formulas that are within EdgeRater. There's actually a lot of other code behind the scenes that's custom coded to create those reports. So things you'll find in Pro Tools are all of those kinds of things. And as you can probably see, %B migration is a very specialized report. And so that is in the Pro Tools category. If you use this frequently, which many people do, put a little star by it, and it will then be in your favorites category. So yeah, if you're using, and you would find the other report, the one I was just saying that is been superseded in the HDSI category, and you'll find the old %B buckets report, you may have that one still. I would recommend just not using that anymore and going to your Pro Tools for the migration report. Okay, yeah, no, for the recordings, there'll be a link sent out to you. Great, okay, awesome. All right, I think I got all those questions, great. So then the question is, oh, Manchester City scored a goal. Oh. So then the question is, once you've got the overview, what about the individual stocks? Okay, we've got a general profile of what's been going on, and that's where the %B buckets per symbol report comes in. You'll find %B buckets per symbol report in this one will be in the hot topics category, and hot topics is a general category for templates that are more of the scanning type templates, but specialized scans, but don't have any extra special coding actually built in within the program for them. They're all done using formula scans. You'll find %B buckets per symbol in there. Put a little check mark by it, a little star, and you'll come to that report. And let's get this running. Okay, so I did run that, and now this is breaking down. There's quite a lot of information in here, and it's I'll explain it in terms of the columns that we have. So the first set of columns are all about your daily %B. So %B based on daily charts. This is %B based on weekly charts, and this is %B based on monthly charts. So that's just, if you think about %B is derived from Bollinger Bands, daily Bollinger Bands, weekly Bollinger Bands, and monthly Bollinger Bands. That's what these three columns are. And then within those groupings of daily, weekly, and monthly, you now also have current day, and then looking back 5 prior days. So current day is day 0, number of days ago, 0 equals today, 0. Over here, column L is your column for current bar, which was Friday. And then you can go back Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, and then the previous Friday. So you can see where each individual stock was within its Bollinger Bands for a history of actually 6 days. And then if you go to the weekly set, you can look at the same for the weekly. And in this case, obviously, you're looking at current week, prior week, etc., up to 6 weeks of history. And then for months, you're looking current month, same for months, up to 6 months or half a year of history. And then the final column beside each of these groupings is the bucket move. And this is really just a indication of where the current bucket is versus where it was the prior day. So it's taking the difference between column 0, current bar, and 1, prior bar. So a very quick way then of finding stocks that are trading above their upper Bollinger Bands is to just look at just sort by, and you can always sort by single clicking on a column header. You can just click on there and just find the 11s. And I said before, 11s is the bucket which is above the upper Bollinger Band, and you have a handful of stocks that are in the 11. You can see where they were the prior day. So some of them were 11s prior day or 10s. So they've been, obviously this one here, GoGo, has been moving up the upper Bollinger Band. Let's take a look at the chart of that. So you can see it's above the upper Bollinger Band. It was above the upper Bollinger Band yesterday, the day before, pretty close to it the day before that, and so on. So that's how that works. So the bucket move is an interesting column. If you're looking for impulses, a stock could be trading at bucket 0, but the next day it could be trading at bucket 5. It's a 5 bucket move. Let's sort by bucket move. So now we have stocks that aren't necessarily above the upper Bollinger Band. This one happens to be, but the stocks that are making the biggest move within their Bollinger Bands. So let's take a look at these. And these are interesting, obviously, because obviously some people are interested in the stocks because they've made these huge moves. And so you can just scroll down through this list. Some of these will appear. You'll note that when we did the review at the beginning of the good, bad, and ugly stocks, some of these are the same names. That makes sense, but some aren't. And this is where you can pick up some stocks that are maybe have not been noticed as much. And we'll just scroll down through this list. So if you were looking for something you could do, I'm not saying this is something that works in general, but if you felt that the market was basing, making a base and was about to turn around, and you were looking for stocks that were trading at the lower Bollinger Band and turning around, then what you could do is go to column one meaning the day before, current bar, and drop down your little filter and then sort by, filter so that you're only going to be looking at bucket 0, 1, 2, and maybe 3. So kind of bottom fishing sort of idea here. And then looking at the current column, current bar, and sorting by the highest bucket, essentially. Or you could just go to bucket move and sort by bucket move. So these are the stocks that were in their lower bucket areas and are now starting to move up. So you can tell, it doesn't look great. There's a big drop. It's trading at the lower Bollinger Band, as was picked out by the template, but on Friday had a little pop. So interesting to see those. That's something that maybe people aren't paying attention to. And so if you're looking for things that it's not necessarily the crowded trade, perhaps that's a good thing to look at. So it's an interesting technique to do that. That's the daily. Daily works very nicely, but if you're aiming for a longer time frames, if you're trading positional trading, you might want to look at weekly or even monthly. Let's go to the weekly. And before you do anything else, once you've done a filter on a column, it's probably a good idea to clear that filter just so you see all the stocks again. And then we'll take a look at the same thing, but for the weekly bucket history. So let's take a look at, first of all, we'll sort by stocks that are trading above their weekly Bollinger Band. I'm still looking at a daily chart over here, but I can switch that to a weekly chart. Okay, so now I'm looking at stocks trading above their upper weekly Bollinger Band. Let's go and do what we did before. Look for stocks that the prior week were trading in the lower areas of the weekly Bollinger Bands. So let's go 0, 1, 2, and 3. And now we'll sort by bucket move on the weekly bucket move. And so here's a stock VNet that did come up in the best performing stock of the week, as you would expect in the good, bad, ugly report. This was the, was it 16%, something like that. And here you see it's indicated here, had a big bucket move. AbbVie came in here. Obviously, what you can do is, rather than keep switching back and forth between weekly and daily charts, is you can just scroll your screen over, so that once you're looking at your weeklies, you can also just scan over and see where things are on the daily bands as well. And then take a look at a few more. So lots of different techniques you can use here. If let's try another idea. Let's go and clear this filter. Let's take a look at stocks that are, say, 5 weeks ago, were trading at the upper Bollinger Band. So these were all the rage 5 weeks ago. Let's see what's happened since then. So 5 weeks ago would have been when we're in May. So what's the date today? Is it 17th, 18th? So we're talking about April, probably the beginning of April, somewhere around there. And if I bring this chart back, and actually we're on a weekly chart here. So here's 1 week ago, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's April the 12th. The week ending April 12th is what we're looking at here. So it was trading above its upper Bollinger Band. So let's just go through these, and you can see just by scanning forward through here to 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, if they have stocks have stayed above the upper Bollinger Band or towards the upper ends of the Bollinger Bands, or if they've sold off. So interesting to check that out. It's just another technique that you can use in the program to get a feel for if you had an idea of a trading strategy that was looking at stocks that are at the upper Bollinger Band, then you can go and quickly see how things moved over the last 5 weeks time period. You can run any report in EdgeRater for any prior day as well. So obviously by default, this just runs for the current day, but you could go back to a particularly interesting date in history and run the report for that date too. Very easy to do. And I'll just quickly show you how to do that. Once you're in the program, at the top of the screen, you've got the Run Template button, and you can choose a date. So you might want to run any report for any prior date, and it will come up with the values on that date. So it's an interesting way to see what the reports look like. And obviously, then the chart will update to show you and point at the bar that you ran the report for. So that's an interesting thing too. Anyway, I wanted to just leave this open for questions. If there's any more questions, we'll take questions now. Otherwise, we're going to wrap this up and finish a little earlier today. So, okay, webinars are not posted on the YouTube channel yet. They will eventually make their way over to the YouTube channel. Probably is going to be a few days after the webinar has been done. But if you want to get access to the recording soonest, register for the webinar, and you'll also get a link to the recording. As I said, Zoom will send out that link a day after the webinar, so it'll still be 1 day. But what I try and do is I have to put the recording online anyway, and what I try and do is do that within a few hours and send out a link to people who registered, so you'll get to see that same day. So you'll end up probably with 2 emails. One will be from me saying about a few hours later saying the link is ready, and then the other one will be from Zoom a day later saying where the link is. Let's see. So what I should show is we're talking about the website and where you can find links. This was, I have to apologize because I sent out a link to this webinar in the email. Normally, and you can't see it on here, if you go to the support page and upcoming webinars, I forgot about adding it. They should appear in here. Any upcoming webinars should appear on this page. So you get there from support, upcoming webinars, and it should appear in here. But I apologize, today's one did not appear there. You could register from there normally. Let's see. Right, the %B buckets per symbol poll is located in the category Hot Topics. Okay. Wojtek, standard B Bollinger Band length is 20 period daily. That's correct. is there a way to change it to 50 period, which is to 50 period? Yes. Is there always change to 50 period? Yes, good question. So let's bring back the template. This is not something that the template has enabled a configuration for. So if you're talking about the buckets per symbol template, it's put into the template itself. And in order to use a different period for Bollinger Bands, you have to jump through a little hoop, which is to find the template in your Edge Club folder under Edge Rater, Documents Edge Rater, Edge Club System. You'll find the template in there, and within that template, you'll find a link to the script that it's running, and once you've found that, you can adjust the script. So it's not an easy change, let's say that, but it's possible to do, and you can end up with configure your own templates for your own specific time periods for Bollinger Bands. How'd you get to the YouTube channel? That's also from support page, view the videos. That should send you to the YouTube channel. And there are some, so as I said, I haven't put the most recent videos, webinars up yet, but they will be going up there. If you look at videos, there is the latest video on there is the Gil Morales at the Pacific Northwest Trading Workshop video, which if you haven't checked that out, I definitely recommend taking a look at that. That was an excellent presentation from Gil Morales, talking about current market, how it's changed from prior days, and the undercut and rally idea that he has. Definitely recommend that. Okay. Excuse me, I'm just going to read this. All right, so there's a question here about the analysis of the 5 week ago report, different results from trade simulation used that I had done some time ago on Bollinger Bands. And I absolutely think that's true. Obviously, different market conditions have different results. It's not possible to say that. It would be nice, wouldn't it, if you could say every time stocks cross above the upper Bollinger Band, they're going to retrace and go to the lower band, or they're going to continue on to higher highs. Obviously, different market conditions, it's going to be different. I believe that you'll probably find that over history, if you run enough simulations over enough stocks and enough time period, you'll probably find a 50-50 outcome on that. So yes, there's no guarantees there for sure. But you want to look at current market. The most interesting information is probably the most recent information. That's the most current thing that you have. The only thing that's more current, I wouldn't say current, but the only thing that's more current than the recent history or yesterday's bar is if you look in the options market and you're looking at the implied volatilities, and that's now a consensus opinion of what options traders think is going to happen to those stocks over the next however many days, depending on the expiration of the options. That's really that's the most sort of cutting edge, forward looking thing that you can get. So another Wojtek, are there moving averages in Edge Racer that that don't just average close? So if you wanted to find a moving average that averaged highs or lows. Now, if I go to my list of scripts over here and I look for average, okay, I'll probably have to look for moving average over here. If you add a moving average to a chart, you only get the choice of putting in the time period, and that's going to use the moving average of close. If you wanted to use moving average of the open, you would have to, I would say, create your own script, but it's not as hard as it sounds. You would just hit the edit button on moving average. So I've hit that, and the script for moving average is basically MA close N periods, and N periods is set to 12. If you wanted to make that moving average of highs, you would go MA H N period, save as, and I'll call it MA of high. Once you've saved that, it's not going to overwrite the moving average in the system indicators. It's going to go under your My Scripts area, and now you have a moving average of highs. So you can add that in over here, drag it onto the chart, and you've got your own custom indicator there. Yep, you're welcome. Anything else of interest? I got a lot of feedback from last week's webinar that it would be interesting to go through some of the templates, or definitely the new templates that come out. But what I thought would be also quite good would be to do a review on a weekly basis. So take one template from the history of templates that are there and just go through that, like I've just done with the %B buckets migration. And so what I was planning for next week was to look at correlation. And there's two templates that are interesting with correlation. There's the correlation matrix template, and then there's the correlation alpha and beta template. So I plan to go through those two next weekend. And then I'll put links to those in the YouTube channel as well. But that was something that came up. If you think that's a good idea, thanks, Jeff. Then let me know, please. And so, yeah, that's the plan, to continue to do something on Saturday mornings. And obviously, there'll be time for questions. So even if the question is not related to what we go through, I want to try and keep those presentations to maybe a half hour, and then leave more time for questions, and we can get into some good stuff. Okay. Yes. Okay. So that's Wojtek again. So if you're over in your chart designer and you're looking for a script, Control F for Freddy, Control F, that's your normal Windows key for find, and that works in this list as well. Control F will put the little search box, and then you can start to try and find your indicators over there. Talking about Alpha 21, so that was something that came up last weekend. There was a question about Alpha 21 template, which I had put in the system a few years ago. And I was just then during the week last week looking at Alpha 21 ranking template, and I have found that it is not actually working the way it should work with all the linking to enable you to update the charts and everything. So I'm going to be making an update to that, and probably will roll that out next week. So that should all be working again by the end of next week. Okay, guys. Anyone know what the score is in the game? I think it's halftime. Let's see. They're about to start. second half. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Are they going to tell me the score? And the score is, no, we don't know. All right, well, I guess it's time to go and watch the game. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.